Welcome to my 40th class. Today's 40th class successfully. We have a few more sessions to go. Today, yesterday we have completed the beautiful history taking. Arvaz, were you there in the class? Okay. Now today we'll take one by one systemic examination, but before that, we will today talk about the general physical examination. So, like the format that I told you yesterday, first we have to take the history. In history, we discuss the name, age, sex, then chief complaint, history of present illness, history of past illness, family history, personal history, medical history, treatment history, physical history, habits, and then menstrual history if you are female. Now, then coming the next part of the case sheet writing is your general physical examination before we go to the systemic examination. In general physical examination, it's a general observation from head to toe. Because in general physical examination, you may find some clues toward some diagnosis. It could be neurological, it could be cardiovascular, it could be respiratory, it could be abdominal. So in general physical examination, you are supposed to see entire body from top to bottom, just an observation, and see if the following things are there in this particular patient. So before the sentence, we have to begin with 40-year-old male or 30-year-old female. Build. First, you have to talk about the build. Build is just an average assessment. I mean, physical inspection assessment. Build, moderately built or average built, moderate built or obese or overweight or morbidly obese. And then your nourishment. Is patient very well nourished or undernourished or averagely nourished? So you have to mention these. And patient is conscious or not conscious, coherent, cooperative. These are the regular words. It has to come in flow. So 34-year-old female, moderate built, and well nourished, conscious, coherent, cooperative. These words should come in a flow, routinely for everyone. Then, if patient is not cooperative, you can write patient not cooperative, patient is irritable, or if the patient is incoherent, you say patient incoherent, like a stroke patient, if the patient is not able to understand your language, he may be having sensory aphasia, he may not be able to understand what you are saying. So you have to mention all this. If the patient is not conscious, what is conscious, what are levels of consciousness, we'll discuss when we come to neurological examination. So you are all familiar with this pickle business, pickle, pallor, depress, clubbing, kalonachia, lymphadenopathy, and edema. Pickle. You write pickle, no? Please, examination, don't write pickle. Don't write pickle, you have to write everything in full sentence. So each word, each sign denotes some underlying disease. For example, pallor. Pallor, where do you see? What are the sites you see? Conjunctiva, tongue, palms, nails, and generally skin. And pallor indicates that this patient could be having anemia. But again, all pallor-looking patients need not be having anemia. Their hemoglobin may be 40. Because of the skin color, they may look pale, but in fact, they are not having any anemia. At the same time, this side also, patient looking pink conjunctiva, normal conjunctiva, still the HP can be low. So just by looking, you have to mention there is pallor, but you're not sure whether the patient is really anemic or not. You should keep this in mind. Then icterus. Icterus is jaundice. Jaundice. What are the sites that you look for jaundice? Sclera, again tongue, mucous membrane, palms, and general skin. So sclera. This is bile pigments. Bilirubin, bile salt, bile pigments. Bile pigment, they like specific tissue like elastic tissue. The elastic tissue is present abundantly on the sclera and in the skin. So wherever the elastic tissue is there, his color gets attracted to, and you will see jaundice. Jaundice means there is a hepatocellular disease. It could be diseases in the liver, elsewhere. Suppose sepsis or congestive heart failure. Sometimes they can present with jaundice. So jaundice again, if it's the jaundice, your investigation, your examination, your test, all related to that particular suspicious disease that you are suspecting. Then clubbing. Clubbing is nail clubbing. Again, there are grades of clubbing. Grade 1, 2, 3, 4. You are familiar with that. Clubbing, somebody asks you what is clubbing, you should say obliteration of the angle of the nail bed. And then stage 2 is the first stage 1 is fluctuation, the second is obliteration. Then you have drumstick appearance, the parrot beak appearance. And stage 5 is osteoarthropathy, pulmonary osteoarthropathy. That is stage 5 of clubbing, that is number 5. So clubbing can be because of various diseases. If somebody asks you a question, what are the causes of clubbing? You can divide it into cardiovascular, respiratory, and GIT. In GIT, you have cirrhosis of liver, you have clubbing. In respiratory system, any suppurative lung disease, any lung which has pus inside, like your lung abscess, bronchitis, or empyema, you can have clubbing. And same thing, cardiovascular diseases, infected endocarditis, or any congenital diseases in the heart, you can have clubbing. So anybody asks you clubbing, just don't mention one or two reasons to tell the classification. The causes of clubbing are divided into cardiovascular, respiratory, and GIT related diseases. And chylomicria. Chylomicria is spoon-shaped nail that indicates that this patient is having chronic iron deficiency. Chronic iron deficiency, if it is acute, minor anemia, will not cause chylomicria. Chylomicria means spoon-shaped nails. And lymphadenopathy. Lymphadenopathy, you have to feel the cervical, axillary, and inguinal lymphadenopathy. Again, you have so many causes of lymphadenopathy. Edema. Edema, is it feet, edema feet, or puffiness of the face, or abdomen, or sacrum? So edema usually occurs in the dependent areas. As yesterday I was telling you, if edema starts in the lower limb, usually it is cardiac in origin. If edema starts in the abdomen, usually it is hepatic in origin. The edema starts in the face to begin with. Early morning phase, puffiness of the face, that could be renal edema. So this is a general guideline. There is no hard and fast rule for this. Then coming to your vitals. Vitals are very by every patient, irrespective of the complaint, age, sex. You have to examine your particular pulse rate, which is very, very important. Here, we just mentioned this pulse rate, but if you're talking about cardiovascular examination, you have to tell everything, all 10 points related to your pulse. So here, because it is general physical examination, we just mentioned pulse, rate, and rhythm. That's all. Is it regular or irregular? Pulse rate, you have to count the radial artery. Sometimes you are not able to feel, you can count on the see on the other side. Or sometimes patient is dehydrated, hypertensive, you cannot feel the pulse. You can feel the carotids or even femoral artery pulses. So you have to write the pulse rate and rhythm. Is it regular or irregular? The blood pressure, of course, every patient you have to check blood pressure. Ideally, the blood pressure, we discussed in the blood pressure topic last week. When you are measuring blood pressure, first time you are measuring blood pressure, make the patient sit for 15 minutes before you check the blood pressure. 15 to 20 minutes, because when you check the blood pressure, patient should not be in anxiety, patient should not have smoke, patient should not have taken alcohol, the stomach should not be full, overeating. A patient should be made to sit about 15 to 20 minutes and make them sit and check their BP, and ideally no mercury related BP. Good old sphygmomanometer should not be used anymore. That is orders from the WHO. We are still using, sadly, but all of you please purchase the digital or electronic or whatever, Android or anything you can purchase, but abandon the old mercury related. Any medical equipment related, mercury contains mercury, including your thermometer, you should not use. Thermometer, we get digital and all these electronic these days. All these guns you have, thermal. Okay. Then temperature, of course, every patient, you have, especially in the examination, you have to write all these things. If you are measuring BP, you have to mention 130/90 in the right arm, in a sitting position. All these things you have to. There's some old examiners are very particular about these things. Don't just write pulse rate 670, 70 regular, or 80 regular, or 80 irregular. Then blood pressure 130/90, right upper limb, sitting position. Because sometimes there's a difference between right and left. Even physiologically, there's a little difference in the right, less than 5 millimeters, more in the right side. The right side we use more. And ideally speaking, you should check both the hands and both the legs if you are checking somebody for the first time. General rule, that's a rule. Coming to temperature, don't write temperature normal or temperature in your examination. Remember, please don't write temperature normal or afebrile. Don't write that. You check, you're supposed to carry your own thermometer to the examination hall. I'll tell you the kit. Right now, I'll tell you the kit. You have to carry a kit, a small pouch or bag, where you have your examination kit. Stethoscope, torch, key hammer, tape, scale, cotton, little cotton to test the sensation, a small pin to pain sensation, and little sugar, little salt for taste sensation, and something to smell, or some clouds or some ilaichi or some small perfume, something you can carry. That is an examination student's kit that you have to carry. Your 2 scales to measure the JVP. And if you have to measure the abdominal girth, you have to have a full length measuring tape. So these are the examination student's kit you have to carry to your medicine examination without fit. Some old examiners are very, very particular that show me your kit, what that you are carrying. Don't borrow. So it happens sometimes. They forget even stethoscope. Yes, our students are capable of this. Many times we have seen. They run out and get the stethoscope. Please carry your own material, please, because some examiners get very angry and they may give you less marks. So this is the kit. Just buy a small pouch, be ready, and your apron should be well washed and well ironed. It should not, the button should be intact. There should not be any tears or any patches or any, it should be well, and your hair, your clothes should be, don't wear, one of my good students, a couple of years back, he came with completely torn jeans, like his entire knee joint, all 3 compartments of the knee joint were visible. It was a big hole in one of the knees of his jeans. So my professor, my external examiner were joking, what is this? And all. He told some cock and bull story, which he did not actually believe. Anyway, be careful, your dress, your presentation, your body language. When you go inside, say good morning or good afternoon, then don't sit like that until the examiner says sit down. So these are small. At least you can act as if you're really respecting your teachers, your examiner. That is one thing. Okay. Then temperature, as I told you, you have to measure temperature. Even the patient is not complaining of fever, as a routine, you have to check the thermometer, either in the axilla or in the mouth. And then note down. Don't write normal, don't write afebrile. And respiratory rate, you have to count 1 minute respiratory rate. When you are counting the respiratory rate, don't tell the patient that I am counting without his knowledge. If you tell that you take normal breath, you can't give a rest. Then it becomes conscious. So don't, Buzz is laughing. Don't tell him. Just keep observe. Just keep count the 1 full minute of respiratory rate. Just note down. What is normal respiratory rate? 12 to 18. It's a little more in females, normally. So for whatever reason. Then try to comment on the top to bottom. You generally just at a glance examine air texture, because malnutrition, protein calorie malnutrition, they will have sparse hair or thin hair or split hair, something like that. And then teeth, if their teeth are intact or they're gone or they're having a nicotine state which can which can tell you that could be a telltale sign of some underlying cardiovascular disease or lung carcinoma, that this patient is a chronic smoker or chronic tobacco chewer. Teeth healthy, no tobacco stains, no dental caries, no loss of teeth, or patient has one loss of tooth. You can mention. And then mention general 1 or 2 words of the skin. Skin healthy, sometimes you may see some skin diseases, some rash or some ulcers or something. And then if the patient is dehydrated, you may see some dry skin, and if you pinch, the fold may be seen for a few seconds. So skin examination, just in 1 minute you have to examine. And then how is he standing, how is he walking, in general opinion about this. This is called general physical examination, which is a compulsory for any patient. You may get a respiratory case, you may get a cardiovascular case, you may get a neuro case, you may get an abdominal case. But until now, whatever we discussed yesterday, the history taking, the complaints, history taking, and general physical health. This is a common for all complaints, all diseases. Now, the real examination comes from systemic examination. So general physical examination, don't spend much time. You can just give it one quick reading. Yes, sir. You can give one quick reading, you'll understand everything what general physical examination.
Does gait come in general physical examination?
Yeah, gait is about 2 things. Gait you can mention, patient is able to walk. You can mention, or even if you don't mention, anyway we are going to mention the gait in the CNS. CNS we are going to mention. But as a general observation, if the patient is walking into your room with some limping or something, you can mention. There's nothing wrong. This is a general examination. But the details of gait, what type of gait and all, you are going to tell in neurological examination. And I think today we'll take up GIT, abdominal examination. Abdominal examination is very, very interesting, because abdomen, I always tell my student, abdomen is a Pandora's box. Sometimes even 2, 3, 4, 5 doctors examine and come to one conclusion. Ultimately, after investigation, it may turn out to be a different disease. So, a lot of surprises are there in abdomen. That's why it's called a temple of surprises. Abdomen is a temple of surprises, or Pandora's box. Pandora was a king. He was taking out all beautiful things from the box. Sometimes a rose, sometimes a pigeon, sometimes a ring, sometimes a beautiful girl comes from the box. So that was the old king Pandora. So the examination of abdomen is a little different from other systems. So the interesting things I am going to tell you, please listen carefully. You're not right. If you look at the chest, you have heart here, you have to, you can draw. If you draw, the chest is always seen. Anyway, this is the heart, this is the lungs. Okay, brain also, it is fixed, just like a picture perfect arrangement in the brain. Even chest also, you have a picture perfect arrangement, 2 lungs with all those structures, ribs, and the heart in between. But in case of abdomen, it's not like that. Abdomen, when you ask someone to draw the abdomen, nicely they will draw like that. This is the liver. This is the spleen, stomach, gallbladder, intestines, large intestine. This is small and this is large intestine. I have to come down here. Sorry. I have to come down. So here in back you have two kidneys, you have pancreas here. So this is a diagram of abdomen, but in reality, they are not separately placed compartment-wise like your chest and brain. The difference here is they're all crumpled and jam-packed and as if you're in a hurry, you're traveling to some other place. In a hurry, you pack everything in your bag. You put all the clothes, shoes, bag, books, everything, pack and just close it and rush to the airport. That's what it looks like. Everything is like you cannot say that the intestine is here only. It can be here, it can be here, it can be here. And the large intestine may start here, stop here, and everything, put it in a jam-packed, crumpled way. Crumpled. There is no properly organized. But the organs are very well organized, but the position is not like picture perfect like this brain and chest. You should understand it. Therefore, it is difficult. That is the difficult part of abdominal examination. So the arrangement of the organs, intestine, everything is like a complex. So how to solve this problem? So you have to take the help of some landmark, physiological, anatomical landmarks, and we have some artificial lines we draw and to separate out one from the other. So anatomical landmarks, what are the anatomical normal landmarks you have in the abdomen? In the center, there's a midline. You can imagine a midline or linea alba. In many patients, you can see a little whitish line if you can observe somebody's abdomen properly. You can see a central little whitish line for linea alba. Either side of linea alba, you have rectus sheath. So that a midline, a center line is taken as a natural anatomical landmark. Then your xiphisternum is a very important landmark. Then your costal margin. Costal margin corresponds to your 10th ribs. Costal margins are, and then when you come down, your umbilicus, which is in the center, that also is a natural anatomical landmark. When you are mentioning about any sign, you mention in relation to the umbilicus, 2-inch left to the umbilicus, or 3-inch above the umbilicus, or 2-inch below the umbilicus. Umbilicus is taken as a landmark, anatomical. Then when you are coming down, you have a pubic symphysis. On the each side, you have an anterior superior iliac spine and iliac crest. So these are the normal anatomical landmarks. Whenever you are talking about anything, be it a patch of hypo pigmented patch, if it is 3-inch right and below the umbilicus. So this way you have to mention whatever abnormal things you are finding. So these are the natural, normal anatomical landmarks. We have artificial landmarks, we have lines that I will come to whiteboard again. So we have the xiphisternum as a midline. Best thing is this is best thing is there are two things. You can divide into 4 quadrants: right upper, left upper, right lower, left lower. And from the umbilicus, you draw a perpendicular on the horizontal line, and it becomes 4 quadrants. So you can use this as whenever you are mentioning any symptoms or somebody is coming with right lower abdomen or left upper abdomen, you can say that. But for convenience sake, we are dividing now the abdomen into, you all know these 9 quadrants. If anyone can open your audio and tell me when I'm asking the quadrants, you can tell me, please. I'll be happy. Yes. Yes, this one,
Epigastric.
epigastrium. Very good. This one,
Left hypochondrium.
very good. This one,
Right hypochondrium.
Right hypochondrium.
okay. This one,
Umbilical.
umbilical. This one. I know this is the place you will get stuck.
Left lumbar.
Left lumbar.
Lumbar.
Left
Okay. Here,
Right
this is
lumbar.
Right lumbar.
okay. This
Hypogastrium.
hypogastrium or suprapubic. This one,
Suprapubic.
Iliac.
this one,
Left iliac.
Left iliac.
left iliac first, right iliac.
Right
Right
iliac.
iliac.
So this is more convenient division for our understanding sake. You can mention if there is any abnormality, symptom wise, sign wise also, you can mention these 9 quadrants. So how are we dividing these 9 quadrants? What is this line? What is this line?
Transpyloric.
Transpyloric. Where is the pylorus? Can you see pylorus from outside? You have to use some landmark. This is a costal margin. The lowest part of costal margin corresponds to your 10th rib, costal margin. And this one,
Transtubercular.
tubercular. And this one, tubercle of the anterior superior iliac spine. The line joining both the tubercles of the anterior superior iliac spine is the second horizontal line. And the vertical lines,
Midclavicular.
mid-clavicular, here midpoint of inguinal ligament. This is the inguinal ligament. There are 2 things. Midpoint of the inguinal ligament is different from the mid-inguinal point is different. I don't know whether you know it or not. Students, do you know midpoint of inguinal ligament and mid-inguinal point? Both are different. Arba, do you know this?
Yes.
You know. So take the midpoint of inguinal ligament and draw a perpendicular line here. So these are the 2 vertical lines. 2 horizontal, 2 vertical lines divide the abdomen into 9 quadrants. Now, all of you, you can say loudly, what are the organs? Right hypochondrium.
Liver, gallbladder,
Yes,
head of the pancreas, duodenum.
good.
First and second part.
Head of the pancreas, who said that? Pancreas is right hypochondrium. Okay, epigastrium,
Stomach.
stomach and liver, left border. Liver comes
Liver
like that.
also.
Liver comes like that. Left lobe of the liver. Okay. And duodenum also. Stomach, duodenum also present here. Left hypochondrium, right hypochondrium, you
Spleen.
forgot one more thing. Right hypochondrium, you forgotten one more thing. Hepatic,
Gallbladder.
Hepatic duct.
hepatic flexure or hepatic flexure, the bending colon, hepatic flexure. Where your ascending colon and transfer colon meet. And here left side, spleen and
Spleen.
splenic flexure of the colon. Splenic
Splenic
flexure
flexure,
of
yes.
the colon. So coming to umbilicus, what are the structures umbilicus?
In small intestine.
Small intestine and your pancreas,
Pancreas.
head, body and tail. Head, body and tail, pancreas. We discussed about pancreatitis and intestines. And here in the right lumbar,
Right kidney.
right kidney, left lumbar, left kidney.
Left
Here,
kidney.
in right
Left
lumbar,
kidney.
you also have ascending colon. Ascending colon,
Ascending colon.
right suprarenal. Left side, left kidney, left suprarenal, and descending colon. Okay, we will come down. The suprapubic area. Here you have ureter sources, urinary bladder,
Yes.
urinary bladder,
Urinary bladder.
And then
prostate,
prostate in females.
Uterus.
Uterus. And some parts of small intestine.
Very good. So the small intestines are everywhere. Small intestines are everywhere. Even it will come to your left iliac fossa also. That's why I said it's not like a diagrammatic picture like arrangement in the abdomen. That's why there's a lot of confusion. What we think clinically may not be a real disease inside. Okay, and this left iliac fossa, left iliac fossa. What are the structures?
Sigmoid colon, rectum.
Descending colon, sigmoid colon, and rectum comes here in the suprapubic. And here you have, nobody is talking about ovaries. Ovaries, left ovary, left ureter, left ovary. Here, your ileocecal junction, appendix, right ovary, and right ureter. So these are the expected parts of the abdomen. But sometimes, as I told you once, somebody's appendix was in the right hypochondrium. We got confused with the cholecystitis, but after surgery, after CT scan, the appendix was in a hepatic position. So any surprise may be expected in the abdomen. So this is grossly, you have to remember what are the structures in this each one of the 9 quadrants of the abdomen. So basically, suppose there is a pain in the right hypochondrium, you think in terms of colitis, ileocolitis, appendicitis, or oophorytis. Oophorytis, self-injected oophorytis. So these are the things. Same thing here. If somebody has a pain lower abdomen, you can think in terms of bladder, ureter, and the sigmoid colon and rectum and anal canal. So this is the arrangement that you should remember. So that's why in the symptom, in the complaint, that's why I told you the symptoms precede the signs. Why should you ask about symptom? Because symptoms precede the signs in many patients. So you can detect the disease before the sign appears, as I told you yesterday. So you have to ask the patient, where is the pain or where is the swelling, for example. If a patient says that there is a swelling here, in the right, if the patient says that I've got a swelling in the right upper quadrant, then you think in terms of either hepatomegaly or there is a swelling of the gallbladder or there is a swelling of the colon. Like that, what are the structures are present in that particular quadrant? So diseases arising from that particular part of the abdomen. So this is general rule, but there are exceptions. There is a confusion a lot. Many times what we think is different from what it is there inside. Here I will show you the live demonstration on Viresh. This is the costal margin, sternum, umbilicus. Okay. Now you have to name the quadrants now. This is in a live patient. All of you, please open your audio.
Epigastrium.
Right.
Right hypochondrium.
Right hypochondrium. Left hypochondrium.
umbilical,
Right lumbar.
left lumbar,
lumbar.
left iliac,
Left iliac fossa. Hypochondrium.
hypochondriac,
Hypogastric.
Right iliac fossa.
hypogastrium, hypogastrium.
I'll confuse you and go quickly. You must catch me and answer quickly.
Right
Right
iliac
iliac.
fossa.
Left hypochondriac.
Hypochondrium.
Jaldi.
Left hypochondriac. Right hypochondriac.
Right lumbar.
Left iliac. Epigastric. Umbilical.
Epigastrium, umbilical, right
Right
iliac,
hypochondriac.
right lumbar.
The two vertical lines. This is the anterior superior iliac spine. You have to feel the tubercle of the anterior superior iliac spine and draw a vertical line here. Another vertical line here is a costal margin. And this is the horizontal line. This is the costal margin. And the mid-inguinal point, midpoint of inguinal ligament, you mark it and put a perpendicular line. So these 4 lines will divide abdomen into 9 quadrants. Okay. So what is the shape of the abdomen? Normal shape of the abdomen.
Flat.
Both shapes.
Flat. Flat. So this person's abdomen is abnormal. Flat is normal. Scaphoid is also normal. Little globular shape also is normal. Nowadays, nobody is fat. Everybody has big belly. Paunch, we call it as a paunch, big paunch. So this is also normal shape. But usually, scaphoid you see in the young children with thin abdominal wall. When they lie down, scaphoid is like this, boat shape. I used to have scaphoid abdomen when I was a kid. Now it has come out successfully. So the shape you have to mention. And inspection. Now we start with inspection. After the knowledge of your quadrants and the structures underlying, you have to say what is the shape of the abdomen. The abdomen can be examined in what position you want to examine the abdomen. Sitting, standing, lying down. Tell me, please. You can type or you can answer.
Lying down with knees,
Knees
like
flexed.
knees.
Two positions you can examine the patient, lying down or standing. Never see the patient examine the abdomen or while the patient is sitting. And standing has advantages because if the patient has a hernia, for example, ideally you have to undress and just a small under garments you can keep, and ideally you have to strip him and then see. Okay, if there is a hernia, when standing position it becomes more prominent if there is an inguinal hernia. So better to make, if the patient can stand, that's the best position. If the patient cannot stand, you can make them lie down. And when patient is lying down, ideally you have to keep the egg legs, knees flexed, because flexion of the knees will make the abdominal muscles loose and you can easily touch and palpate and examine the patients. Otherwise, the patient will keep the muscles tight and you will not appreciate the pathology inside. So in inspection, you have shape of the abdomen, you have the hernial sites. These are called hernial sites are normal. And position of the umbilicus. Always your umbilicus is in center. There are some diseases. Can you tell one example where umbilicus shifted to right or left?
Ovarian masses.
Ovarian mass.
Very good. Who is that? Yes, ovarian mass is the right answer. If big ovarian mass is there on the right side, the umbilicus may get shifted to the opposite side. And the shape of the position of the umbilicus, shape of them. Normally it is inverted. Umbilicus is inverted. Okay. When do you get everted umbilicus?
Umbilical hernia.
Umbilical hernia and obese patients, you may get everted. And what is laughing umbilicus? Or smiling?
Scar of
Ascites.
in ascites also, and a surgical scar.
No, we are not talking about surgical. That will come to surgical scars later.
Ascites that is.
In ascites,
Obesity again. Obesity, you have a laughing umbilicus. When do you call weeping umbilicus? Have you heard of weeping umbilicus? Zainab, are you there? Okay, Hafsa, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Weeping umbilicus. Asfiya, are you there? Weeping umbilicus. Anyone, including Arbaz? Huh? Can you repeat? No. Whenever there is an infection in the umbilicus, we call it as a omphulitis. Omphulitis, the Omphallitis. Omphulitis is infection.
Sir, when there is leakage of urine from the umbilicus, weeping
Yeah.
umbilicus.
Yes, you get some oozing, first discharge or something like that. So that is weeping umbilicus. That's all about umbilicus. Then you have to see any visible scars are there. If visible scar is there, you inquire about the surgical history. For example, if the patient comes with severe acute abdominal pain with abdominal distension, and if there's any umbilicus, if there's any visible scars of any surgical mark, you can think in terms of an adhesion, post-operative adhesion causing intestinal obstruction. Now patient is coming with abdominal distension, vomiting, things like that. So visible scars, you have to, visible scars due to surgical scar, or any visible healed sinuses or ulcers, you have to see any pigmentation of the skin. Striae. What are the striae? Striae marks. You could usually see here. You see here on the side. These are because of this, otherwise known as the stretch marks. Stretch marks are usually seen in obese people or Cushing syndrome people or pregnant people or post-delivery females. So striae, you can see the lines of stretching of the skin. Striae can be physiological because of obesity and pregnancy. Pathologically, Cushing's disease. Wherever abdominal gets distension, then you may find striae here. So, second is abdominal examination is not over just in front. You have to make the patient turn back and see the renal angle. This is called renal angle. This one is renal angle, right renal angle, left renal angle. Renal angle fullness indicates that there could be a renomegaly or there could be a pyelonephritis. So in the inspection, if there is a fullness here, the renal angle, this is the renal angle. You have to feel with the thumb. This is the renal angle. So all abdominal examination patients, you have to feel the renal angle. See the inspection, you have to see for fullness, any swelling. If there is a massive renomegaly, kidney is enlarged because of the renal cell carcinoma or some hydronephrosis, something like that. So you can see a fullness here. So this is the back exam. Then sometimes the patients who are bedridden, they may have the swelling here, sacral edema. Because bedridden patients, the sacrum becomes the dependent part. So you may see edema in the sacrum. So abdominal examination is incomplete without examining the renal angle, without examining the hernial size, and without examining the PR, per rectal examination. That is, these three things are must: renal angle, hernial size, and genital examination. You also have to inspect the genitals according to rule. Some limitations are there, social limitations, but if it is necessary, without examining the genitals, abdominal examination is incomplete. So what are the extra things apart from the front portion? Renal angles, hernial sites, per rectal examination, and genitalia. This completes the abdominal examination. So coming back to inspection, the movements of the abdomen. Is the abdomen moving equally with both the sides? Abdomen moving equally with both the sides, respiration? Or there is any inequality or abdomen is not moving? If there is a peritonitis, abdomen movements will become less. The patient has some intestinal obstruction or an acute abdomen, the movements become sluggish. They should move with respiration. And that's all about it. And any visible swellings. In some people, if there's any liver swelling, sometimes you may be able to see, or there's any tumor, any lipoma, you may see a swelling here. If there's no visible swellings, you have to write there's no visible swelling. And in this, if there is a visible swelling, you have to identify whether it is intra-abdominal or parietal wall. Clinically, you can differentiate most of the time, 90% of the time, you can differentiate between the parietal wall swelling versus intra-abdominal swelling versus retroperitoneal swelling. There are three compartments. This is called planes of the swelling. Plane. What plane the swelling is arising from? Is it parietal wall? Is it intra-abdominal? Or is it retroperitoneal or post-abdominal wall? These are the planes of swelling. In examination, you have to see. So suppose there's a swelling here, and you are inspecting. Ask the patient to raise the head. When he's lying down, raise the head end of the body. Try to raise the head and try to sit 45 degrees. If the swelling becomes more prominent, that means it is in the parietal wall. If the swelling becomes less prominent, that is intra-abdominal. That is if the swelling is above the umbilicus. If the swelling is below the umbilicus, you have to do the same thing with leg raising. Ask the patient lie down. Ask the patient to raise both the legs same time for a couple of seconds. If the swelling disappears, it is intra-abdominal. If it becomes more prominent, it is parietal wall. This is simple test. It's a magical test actually. We used to repeatedly see this in a patient who has one swelling. We used to enjoy when we were students. This is a beautiful thing. I can never forget this. My professor used to teach me my surgery. So that's about swelling. Then visible pulsations. Visible pulsation. Usually you don't see visible pulsation except when the patient is lying down and when the patient is young, thin. So you can see visible pulsation in the epigastrium or sometimes elsewhere. And you also have to look for any engorged veins, which is a marker of any disturbance in the venous return, be it a cirrhosis of the liver, portal hypertension, or something like that. So visible veins, engorged veins also is a part of the abdominal inspection part. That is the inspection. Okay. Then we'll come to the palpation. We'll shift to the palpation. You have to do ideally when the patient is lying down. Right. Make the patient lie down. Put the legs, put the knees. Hold the leg normal. So this is the position of the abdomen for palpation. All the patient will turn to the opposite side, and ask him to relax. Take 2-3 normal long breaths and then start palpate. Palpation during the winter, your hands are very cold. When you touch the patient, he may feel that cold hands. So therefore, you have to rub your hands, especially when you're in UK or USA, or when you're in a winter. So you have to rub your hands like that, make it little warm, and then touch. And ask him, is it very cold? Is it comfortable or not? So that's clear.
Yes, sir.
So start palpating with the fingers, all 4 fingers together. First, superficial palpation. Superficial. Sometimes if the patient has pain or tenderness, he may shout, he may scream. Therefore, you have to just superficial general palpation of all the 9 quadrants. And if there is no tenderness, severe tenderness, then you can go for a little deep palpation. Deep palpation you can do with 1 finger or with the 2 fingers pressing like loose it. So you can palpate like that. See, you can go as deep as you can if the patient can tolerate. This is the method of palpation. This is called general palpation. Superficial is over. Now deep palpation. I am doing a deep palpation. So this is all 9 quadrants you have to see for any tenderness or any mass you are feeling. You can do like this, little bit movements you can do like this. You can sometimes feel a mass, a swelling inside. And if there is a tenderness, you note down. Patient has a tenderness in the right hypochondrium or right iliac fossa or umbilical or epigastric region. So that's about the general palpation. Now coming to organ palpation. So we'll start with liver. liver is on the right, in the right hypochondrium. So this is the costal margin, but imagine that the liver is enlarged. So if it is grossly enlarged, and you start palpation from here, you will miss the border of the liver. Therefore, always, especially in the exam, final examination, examiner will ask you to elicit the finding, demonstrate the palpation of the liver. So therefore, you have to start from the right iliac fossa. Your fingers should be parallel to the costal margin. This is the costal margin. This is his costal margin. So your fingers should be parallel like that. So you keep your hand like that. Start palpating from the right iliac fossa. Keep it pressed. I saw my student doing like this, like that, like don't do that. Your fingers still parallel to the costal margin. Start from the right iliac fossa. Keep it pressed. Ask him to take a deep breath. So if the liver is enlarged, the tip of the border of the liver will come and hit your fingers, and you can feel something is coming and touching your finger. If it is not, then come up 1 inch and again deep palpate, ask him to take a deep breath. If it is touching, that means it is enlarged up to that point. Otherwise, it's not. Again, come 1 inch, half inch, whatever it is. Come up and repeat the same exercise every 1 inch. Each time asking the patient to take a deep breath because liver moves down with respiration. If it is not coming, then come to the last. This is the costal margin. You can feel that. You can go little, you can insinuate your finger little into the costal margin and see if there's any tenderness or liver is enlarged. Sometimes you can feel the borders of the liver. Sometimes if it is a hepatocellular carcinoma, it may be firm to feel also. And then sometimes you can feel the gallbladder if it is enlarged and inflamed, and you can feel, the patient can feel the tenderness. What is Murphy's sign? Murphy's sign. If Murphy's sign is the indicator of acute cholecystitis, you
Inspiratory catch.
Hello? Palpate the right hypochondrium. Ask him to take a deep breath. When he is taking a deep breath, suddenly he will stop with an inspiratory catch. That is a classical of acute cholecystitis. This is called Murphy's sign. General liver palpation, like that. And Murphy's sign, you keep it pressed. Ask him to take a deep breath. He cannot complete his full breath because he will stop short, and that is called an inspiratory catch. He will suddenly, like that, he will have pain. So that is Murphy's sign. So this is the method of palpating the liver. So coming to spleen, I'll make the leg straight for your convenience. You can do that. So this is the spleen. See, as I told you, the liver is toward the right iliac, but spleen enlarges also into the iliac fossa, like that in cross. Pointer. So this is the costal margin. Liver enlarges like that. And this is the costal margin here. Spleen enlarges like this to the right iliac fossa. So when you are palpating the spleen, your fingers should be again parallel to the left costal margin. Here, your finger is like that. Here, your finger is like that. Can you see? Yes. Here his finger is like that. Here, the finger should be again parallel to the left costal margin. So keeping the hand parallel to the left costal margin, you start palpating from the right iliac fossa. Because imagine that your spleen is massively enlarged, crossing the midline, coming into the right iliac. And see what you can do. Palpate, ask the patient to take a deep breath. If the spleen is touching, yes, it is enlarged. If it is not, then go up 1 inch, reach the left costal margin. If the spleen is enlarged, you can feel the notches of the spleen also. And you can say whether it is firm or soft or hard. And notches also you can feel. But these are the two things, liver and spleen. Spleen will not get palpable until and unless it reaches 2 to 3 times of its size. So not being able to palpate the spleen does not mean that spleen is not enlarged. But in case of liver, you can palpate. But liver is almost near the right costal. So liver enlargement, if enlargement, it will become palpable. But whereas a spleen, you get 2 to 3 times to become palpable. So don't think that because spleen is not, many times in malaria patients, we look for splenic enlargement. Spleen is not palpable, but you do an ultrasound, they give the spleen is enlarged. So that is the important point you have to understand here. So that is the palpation of the liver and spleen. Same thing you can palpate for other things. Like sometimes kidney is usually not palpable. You have to feel if there is any swelling of the kidney on each side of the midline here, near the umbilicus here. So that is about palpation of the. So if you find any tumor or any swelling, then you have to palpate. Sometimes both the hands, sometimes one over the other, depending on your convenience and the size of the abnormal thing that you are seeing. And if patient has bladder is full, if the patient bladder is full and is not able to pass urine, sometimes you may see a bulge here. You may feel, if you are feeling from this up, from above downwards, you may feel the upper border of the enlarged full bladder. That is the indication. Again, in the percussion, you have to see. So this is the palpation. Again, you come to renal angle. Renal angle also you have to press. Renal angle also you have to press for any tenderness, which is a sign of pyelonephritis, infection of the kidney. And if there is a tenderness here in the suprapubic area, you may think in terms of cystitis, infection of the urinary bladder. If there is a tenderness in the right iliac fossa, you can think in terms of acute appendicitis or colitis or ileocolitis or ileocecal tuberculosis. And if there is a tenderness here, you can think in terms of either colitis or sometimes female patient, it is infection of the ovary, oophorytis. And so wherever the organ part is situated, that particular part, if it is tender, you can think in terms of that. If the pain is, tenderness is here, in the midway between the umbilicus and the xiphisternum, you can think in terms of pancreatitis. So that is the palpation. So you must be thorough with the palpation. Then suppose somebody has a big belly, ascites, it is very difficult for you to palpate. So we have to palpate in a special way, some dipping method like that, dipping method. Because abdomen is very big, there's a big space between the skin and the organ. So you have to use dipping, stabbing. Sometimes spleen, if you're not able to palpate, ask the patient to turn to this side and then palpate. Put your finger inside the costal margin and feel. So dipping, stabbing, hooking method, these are the various methods that are given in the book. You have to understand the examination of the abdomen. Many times you can come to some reasonably correct diagnosis. So coming to percussion. Percussion, again, you know how to percuss. The action should be only at the wrist level. And start percussing, you usually start percussing from the midline like this. Like that. From midline to right side, midline to left side. This is some above downward circle. You can do this. Can you hear? When you are percussing, at least your 3-4 friends should be able to. I have seen my good girl students. Their sound will not come. They do like this. No. So you should be able to hear the sound. So abdomen, because it contains gas in the intestines, usually it is resonant. And if the stomach, especially here, you can see now. This is epigastrium. He has not eaten his food. So after eating, it will become dull. That's why the lower down, it is dull. Maybe his transverse colon is loaded now. So that is the dullness and resonance. These are two things you should know. What is dull? The intestines are usually resonant. Liver is dullness. And coming to liver percussion, you have to assess the liver span. So to assess the size of the liver. Okay, you start coming from above down in the mid-clavicular line, like this. See, when you come to fifth space, it becomes dull. The above is lung, resonant, dull. So this is the liver dullness starts from here, and it starts from the fifth space till the costal margin. And you come from below, this is the dullness. So that means this is a span, so normal, the liver span. So in the mid-clavicular line, fifth intercostal space to the costal, that is usually 12 to 13 centimeters, liver span. Same thing for the spleen. So this is about percussion. In percussion, you have, the patient has a big ascites, lot of fluid is there in the abdomen. So you have to see what grades of abdomen ascites is there, what grades of, so grade 1 is, what will say, minimal ascites, make the patient go into knee elbow position, and all the fluids come knee elbow position, just the reverse. This is the knee elbow position. This is the knee elbow position. Okay, if there is a minimal ascites, and all the fluid will be accumulated around the umbilicus. So you have to go on percussing. You will find a dull, round, dull area around the umbilicus. That is called caudal sign, which is a sign grade 1 ascites. Caudal sign. Grade 1 ascites. In grade 2 ascites, you will definitely get one case of biliary ascites. So you have to do this. Grade 1 is caudal sign. Grade 2 is shifting dullness. Shifting dullness, you have to like this. So just like that. On the midline, the lateral, resonant. Wherever there is a dullness here, that means fluid is there. So you confirm whether this percussion is really fluid or just fat. So without disturbing your finger, see resonant, and dull here, for example. If there is a dullness in one particular place, don't remove your finger, or the patient will turn to the one side. And then keep your finger for a few seconds, 10, 15, 20 seconds, for the fluid to settle down and air-filled lobes of intestine to come up floating slowly. That will take some 10 to 20 seconds. Then you percuss, it will become resonant. If you want to recheck, again, without disturbing your finger, see the room. Ask the patient to come back to normal position. Again, wait for 10 to 20 seconds. Percuss, it will be dull. So dull, this position, lateral position, resonant. Again, you cross-check, it becomes, that is called shifted dullness. The dullness is shifting. Shifted dullness is a grade 2 ascites. So grade 3, what is grade 3 ascites? Grade 3 ascites, you start percussing from here and you mark the place where it is dull, and you come from the midline to sides. So this is called grade 3 is a horseshoe dullness. Okay, it will be like this horseshoe. But this portion will be resonant, the remaining thing will be dull. So come from above downwards, resonant, dull, and you percuss from here, resonant, dull. This U-shaped part will be resonant, the remaining will be dull. That is called horseshoe dullness, which is grade 3. Grade 4 is severe ascites, big ascites. We call it as a full fluid 3. In that patient, what you have to do is to assess grade 4, fluid 3, you just tap this side of the abdomen and feel the waves on the opposite side. Tap here, you can feel the waves. Sometimes if the patient is obese, the fat waves also can get transmitted to the opposite side. The fat in the abdomen. To avoid that, ask the patient to keep the hand like that. You can check it out. Ask him to put, or ask your other colleague to put. Arbaz is putting his hand like this in the midline. Press it, press. So now we are obliterating the unwanted transmission of the waves from the fat. So now you do the same thing. Tap here one side, feel on the opposite side. If you feel the waves, the ripples of the water, feel the waves of one side to the other, that is called fluid thrill. This is a sign of severe ascites, grade 4 ascites. This is ascites. So, we'll go there. So that was inspection, palpation, percussion. When you go to auscultation, is coming just a second. So each time you have to mention whatever your findings are, dull, resonant. So we'll start auscultation. Auscultation, abdominal auscultation is very simple. You just have to look for the normal peristaltic sounds. Number one, any bruit. Bruit is, what is bruit? It is a murmur-like sound which is heard over the artery. That's called bruit. So first auscultate for the normal peristaltic sound. Most of the times it is heard. Sometimes in intestinal obstruction, the sounds may become peritonitis, sounds may become totally absent. In auscultation, to auscultate for the sounds. Sounds are heard all over, wherever. You have to wait for some time because the peristaltic movements occur once in few minutes. You have to wait for some time. Or you can just make some movement here. You can hear like that. Normal sound. Borrhythmic. It's called borrhythmic. And again, auscultation, you may have to hear for any arterial bruit. Usually, renal artery bruit. Renal artery, where do you palpate? Between the xiphisternum and the umbilicus, midway, 1 inch to the left of the midline, 1 inch to the right. These are the two sides of auscultating the renal artery bruit. Here. And auscultate for some time, let's say. That is called renal artery bruit. It will be seen in renal artery stenosis. And abdominal aorta, also you can see. Sometimes aortic aneurysms, aortic coarctation of the abdominal aorta, you can find the bruit. And same time, you can also hear on the femoral artery. Femoral artery bruit, you can see in patients of aortic regurgitation. So these are the auscultation. Auscultation is not very important in abdomen, unlike CS, CVS and RS. But there's few very important points are there you can diagnose. by auscultation. So this is the clinical examination, complete clinical examination of abdomen. You have to be thorough. Today, please. Today you please read about this abdomen examination, and then you can rewind and see if you have recorded this picture, and we have demonstrated nicely on a live patient. You should not forget the methodology of palpation. So we'll close here. A couple of patients are waiting for me. If you have any quick questions, one or two questions, let us take.
Akshay is asking, do we term tympanic as a normal finding or resonant in the abdominal?
Resonant, you should say resonant. Tympanic is a gaseous distension. When somebody is having big gas inside discharge because of some obstruction, you get tympanic. That's called tympanic. Tympanic is not normal. Resonant is normal.
So I have a question. Does amoebic liver abscess have tenderness?
Amoebic liver abscess, yes, has severe tenderness. Especially amoebic liver abscess has a specific intercostal spaces. You have to check here. You have to check here. These are intercostal spaces. You have to press here. This is called point tenderness. Point tenderness is the word used. Point tenderness. If you press with one finger in one of the intercostal spaces, if the patient has the amoebic liver and any liver abscess, he will scream, shout with pain. That is called point tenderness in the intercostal space, which is a classical of liver abscess, be it amoebic or any other non-amoebic infectious bacterial.
So now from 2K18 is asking which abdominal swellings move with respiration.
What are the organs that move with respiration normally? Sana, liver moves down with respiration. Okay. Kidney also moves down with respiration. Spleen moves down with respiration. Whatever swellings that are occurring in the liver, in the kidney, in the spleen, they move down with respiration. If there is a swelling in the kidney, it moves down. There's swelling in the spleen, it moves down. Whatever normal structures move down with respiration, the swellings arising from those structures, organs, they move with respiration. Okay? Okay, we'll close here. Thank you very much for your listening. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Good night. Take care.